Mr Chairman.
Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and I'm happy to take a call on Part 6. But I would like to point out, Mr Chairman, as I am taking a call on Part 6, that this could have all stopped at Part 2. If the government had agreed to split this bill in two and to send it to Select Committee, where Part 2 could have had the proper consideration that it required. In my 5 years in this Parliament, Mr Chairman, I have not seen a simple piece of legislation drafted so badly as this legislation, or handled so badly, that sees us still here in about the 14th hour of this legislation debating Part 6 of this legislation. It is in the power of the government's hands to change that. And I put that challenge to the government members. If you want this to be over, split the bill in two and send the provision that which undermines private property rights or could undermine private property rights, send it to Select Committee and let it have its due consideration. But Mr Chairman, under this Part 6, I do want to talk specifically about the amendment put forward by David Parker in terms of the National Policy Statement, or an NPS, which of course is an instrument under the Resource Management Act, which is a particularly powerful instrument that the courts have found in terms of the hierarchy, in terms of how it is considered, has a great deal of regulatory power in terms of setting the agenda. And Mr Chairman, it is an instrument that could have a great deal of influence of how our cities are planned in the future. Of course, this is something that the Minister for Housing, Nick Smith, has been talking about for quite some time. And when that was, the draft of that NPS was released back in June this year, my colleague Phil Twyford eloquently described it as a damp squib. That he had the opportunity to actually do something with an instrument as powerful as a National Policy Statement, but in typical style, it did nothing. It did not do the things that we are setting out in this amendment in David Parker's name. But Mr Chairman, I want to talk specifically to Clause 12, which inserts a new Clause 46C, and I want to talk specifically to 46C 2B. And this is the clause that Julianne Genter is offering her amendments to. It is proposing that the requirement for local authorities to undertake detailed spatial planning, which sets aside areas of special value and sets out future infrastructure corridors and networks as an alternative to urban boundaries. And she's proposing that we include climate change in there. And that is certainly something that the Labor Party can support. That one of the key considerations that we have to make when planning the future of our cities is rising sea levels and storm surge. And Mr O'Rourke talked in his speech about infrastructural investment and the development of suburbs in Christchurch that have ended up in the residential red zone when we could have predicted the outcome for those communities. Well, likewise, when we're facing the issue of sea level rise, we know the areas of New Zealand and the areas of our cities that are under threat, and we have the ability through a national policy statement to plan appropriately for those, to put in place the proper infrastructural planning that has to happen. And Mr Chairman, this offers us an opportunity to be progressive, to think ahead and to plan in a 21st century way, not with our heads literally in the sand and not taking account of the future. Because, Mr Chairman, climate change and city planning is absolutely critical. One of the largest meetings at the Paris Convention on Climate at COP21 was actually a meeting of mayors and of cities, and people discussing issues related to cities and how they are going to both adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change. Of course, the Compact of Mayors, which now includes 526 cities globally, which accounts for 438 million people, or 6% of the global population. This was an organisation that was, of course, set up by Ban Ki-moon and is now has a special envoy in Michael Bloomberg. And this is an organisation that is sketching out what progressive cities are doing in their efforts to both adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change. And I see the current member for Clutha Southland, Mr Chairman.
I call Mr. Touré.